I remember the last conversation I had with my father vividly. I'm a good example of somebody who thought it could never happen in my family. Suicide is a topic that we need to get more comfortable with talking about it.
Not talking about suicide because we don't want to put the idea in their head is a myth. Suicide it's a second leading cause of death between the ages of 10 and 25. 10, it's really young. Kids are already thinking about it. You're not going to put the idea in their head. When we know that, 1 in 5 kids is, dying by suicide, if it's not your kid, it's one of their friends who's having suicidal thoughts. Honestly, I think it's hard for parents to wrap their head around the fact that it could be their kid.
I pretty much hear from someone in a school in America every day about concerns about suicidal behavior or an actual death by suicide. Youth suicide has long been a problem. The most dramatic increase in youth suicide has been the rate for middle school age girls. Once parents realize it's the second leading cause of death for teens, once they realize that St. Joseph, Missouri, like many other communities, has experienced youth suicides, then we need to do more.
When I've talked to kids who are suicidal and adults who are suicidal, usually what I found is their shoulders relax because someone finally understands that this is how they're feeling. Is it scary to hear? Yes, even as a counselor, it's scary to hear, but they've just trusted you and now you're able to get them help.
When a suicide of a young person occurs, it's literally like taking a rock and throwing it into a pond. The ripple effect, the schools, the churches, the neighborhoods. And I would argue that ripple effect is greater than ever before today because of social media.
I don't know that we are fully aware of what it's like for our kids growing up right now.
There's a lot of pressure on young people today, which has been a contributor to the rise in the youth suicide rate.
They're under a lot of pressure, and I'm not sure everybody realizes that. They're exposed to a lot more that their brains can't quite make sense of.
Most middle schoolers, essentially the entire technology thing has just been given to them. They have iPads, they have smartphones, they have a laptop computer in their room, which means very difficult to monitor all of that. But we need to be more careful about when we give the keys to all the technology away. About 1/3 of adolescent girls wake up in the middle of the night to check and see who posted what about them. Don't let technology steal your child. All of it it's a privilege. It's not a right. Set reasonable limits. There's a lot of national research pointing out some of the dangers of all that screen time. Less one-on-one discussion with anybody. Kids isolated, staying in their rooms.
With the things online, they're exposed to so much that they don't know how to make sense of. Their brains aren't fully developed. We used to think brains were fully developed by 18. We now know it's not until your mid-20s. And the last part of the brain that develops is the frontal lobe, which is in charge of problem solving, critical thinking. The part that's most active during adolescence is the middle part of the brain, which is in charge of emotion. And so as an adult, if I experience an emotional situation, you yell at me, I may have an emotional reaction, but then my frontal lobe kicks in and says, oh, why might he be yelling at me? What else could be going on for him, to help process that? As a teenager, you yell at me, I have an emotional reaction. My frontal lobe doesn't kick in. And so adolescence, intense emotional time for them.
Vulnerable young people find each other online, and the impact of a youth suicide is never confined to one middle school or one high school. It really affects the entire area. Children do not want their parents to say, do this, do that. They just want to be listened to. And parents need to find the shared time when your child will truly talk to you. Maybe it's making dinner. Maybe it's driving to the mall. But an opportunity, and the less we say, it's almost like the more inquisitive, the more questions we ask, the conversation is over a lot quicker.
So the best thing that we can do is have open communication, set guidelines, have limits, but having that open communication where they trust. And so when my child shows me texts and I can talk through them with her and say, this person who's talking to you probably shouldn't be talking to you this way, and do you know why? And we can have those kind of conversations. Those wouldn't be happening if we didn't have open communication. And then also just having open communication about suicide.
We got to talk about it more in our homes, our schools, and neighborhoods. There are a couple of key things that parents need to be watching out for. Because how do you decide if your teenager's depressed or if they're just irritable, moody, withdrawing from family? I mean, isn't that sort of a part of being an adolescent? So here are the key factors. I would ask a parent, is this pervasive? Is this affecting all aspects of your child's life? Home, school, peers. Is it persistent? Has this gone on for 2 or 3 weeks or more? And the last question I'm going to ask, has your child dropped out of what was previously a very valued, pleasurable activity for her? So if you've had your child drop out of these pleasurable activities, they are pervasive in their changes in behavior, and it's been persistent over several weeks. Really what this means is you need to get help for your child. Here's the reality for adolescents. 20% of all of them suffer from depression at some point during those tumultuous teenage years. Since I know that this community has actually had suicides of young people, parents need to talk with their children and basically get a gauge of how they're doing with the losses of students many of them would have known, to ask simple questions like, what would you do if you ever felt that way? There's help available for you. I am here for you.
You have to know this information. You have to be aware of it. If you don't think it's going to be your own kid, it's going to be one of their friends who's struggling. And so if it takes a village, we need to be there for their friends as well as our own kids.
I am a survivor of my father's suicide. I was a 25-year-old graduate student. I needed to ask directly, but I didn't. If I'd asked directly, very possibly, he would have lived on for many more years. In my career and in my old district, which was huge by Missouri standards, I'm sorry to tell you, 50 kids died by suicide during my quarter of a century working there. Almost to a person, every kid that died, we had no idea. A counselor didn't make an assessment. We didn't make a referral. They weren't getting mental health treatment. 48 of the 50, we had no idea about their problems until the day after they died. This isn't something we can hesitate. We can't think, well, maybe if they're better in a day or two. Immediate action is needed. I think it's also important for everybody to understand. When somebody says to you, I'm thinking I want to kill myself, what they're really saying is, I need help. And I'm telling this to you so you will get me help. And we need to share with kids, you're not the first person to feel this way. There is help available. I'm going to be here for you every step of the way. And what does a good friend do? A good friend gets help. There was actually a great quote from Voltaire. He wrote it in 1764, and I'm only going to change his words slightly. The young man in the fit of melancholy who died by suicide today might have wanted to live had he merely waited a week. So what's the job for all of us? Get them through a difficult afternoon. Get them through a difficult weekend. Get them the support and supervision they need. Most importantly, a message to parents is this simple. Love and appreciate your child for the person they are today. Show them every single day how much you love and appreciate them. Not for the person you hope they will become someday, but if every kid in your school district felt totally loved and appreciated by their parents, this would be a wonderful thing.
I'm trying to convince her that Andrew to name him after me. I said, that's a great name.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's your son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our daughter, one of them, her name is Jill, which is a very simple name, but even in that high school of 4,000, I don't think there was another Jill.
Really? That was a popular name when I was.
Yep, but it goes through periods.
Yeah, true.
Well, she liked Hayden too.
Hayden, I like Hayden.
Okay, good,
I
because
like that.
we like
I
Hayden
like
too.
Hayden Andrew goes very well together.
I know, but we got online to the baby website names,
Yeah.
and people were commenting on there about how Hayden is now a girl's name. And so there was like a debate back and
They
forth.
make
Everything.
What
I know.
about Graydon?
We
Or
thought of
Grady?
Graydon too.
Or Grady?
Yeah.
I like,
Or Garrett?
yeah.
With a
Garrett
G?
was one that she thought of too.
Either with a J or with
Yeah.
a G.
Grayson. I like
Grayson?
Grayson's popular.
Grayson is nice.
Yeah. Well, we got a couple more months. It may be
Grayson.
a.
Grayson's one of those, it's also, now we can move on.
It may be
They
a
make every-
game time decision.
Trevor, Trey.
You have 2 more months? Is that all
Well,
you have?
February. She's doing
I
the.
was gonna say, she doesn't even look
Oh, she feels it. She feels it.
You might not say that.
Yeah. You know.
pregnant.
Although I guess that's a
I like to
compliment.
hear that I didn't
Yeah.
get pregnant.
Okay. All I need to do
I always look very
is do a simple. Well, I gotta do this real quick. So you ever seen Hollywood where they have the boards? They do the. So that's how they sync up all their cameras. But since I don't have that kind of, I just clap. So when I go to edit, I'll know where the sync is.
And I assume we should be totally quiet.
Yeah, just during the responses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll because it will pick it up, and I'll be able to isolate it if it's too much. So. Okay, just for a mic check, I'll have you just say your name, first and last name for me.
Scott, Poland.
Okay. Now, just for a little bit of background, real quick on you.
I directed psychological services for the 3rd largest district in Texas for 24 years. I became very dedicated to suicide prevention, having authored or co-authored 5 books on the subject over the years. I've had the opportunity to testify in front of the U.S. Congress on 4 occasions about suicide prevention and the mental health needs of children. I've also been a responder to multiple tragedies that have involved schools, including events like the Oklahoma City bombing, 9/11 in New York and Washington, and many school shootings.
Okay. Why is that topic so important to you?
I'm a survivor of my father's suicide. In fact, to be honest, most suicide prevention efforts in this country are driven by survivors. And although I don't talk a lot about the specifics of his death, I'm very dedicated to the prevention of suicide for young people. When I first was promoted to director in my Houston area school district, 3 students died by suicide the first semester. Superintendent called me in and basically said, "Scott, what are you going to do about this?" And I said, "I don't really know." He said, "Well, you better figure it out." And that was 36 years ago. And that has really become my priority. And to be honest, I pretty much hear from someone in a school in America every day about concerns about suicidal behavior or an actual death by suicide. And I always respond. I'll return their phone call, I'll return their email, I'll send them something that I've written because I believe it's really important. And I think that schools need to take a leadership in suicide prevention and recognizing mental health issues and especially depression for our students.
Okay. So youth suicide is now the 2nd leading cause of death for young middle schoolers, children, I believe. So that figure seems to be like a number that kind of just jumps out at you because it kind of almost seems like it snuck up on people. Would you seem to agree with that?
Well, youth suicide has long been a problem, especially for middle school and high school students. But it has increased in recent years. And yes, it is the 2nd leading cause of death for adolescents. And it's just really important that we recognize that in our schools, our communities, and our families, because youth suicides can be prevented.
Let's go ahead and talk about real quickly some of the warning signs parents should look out for. Anything that might be a red flag if they notice their children's behaviors.
In particular, the most common warning signs are dramatic changes in behavior, giving away of prized possessions, making out a will, writing an